Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. In this video, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the JW Broadcasting episode for September 2021, which was hosted by governing body helper Patrick LaFranca. Now, there is quite a bit to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
No doubt every one of us at one time or another has faced a discouraging situation. Really, no one is immune from discouragement. This feeling may last for a day or two and then subside, or it might last longer. What can cause us to be discouraged?
Well, I can think of one source of discouragement: being in a cult. Having such an organization micromanage your life to the point where even your sexuality is policed. You're even prohibited from having certain feelings or acting on certain feelings with a consenting partner. You're forbidden from doubting. You're forbidden from questioning. Your very thoughts should align perfectly with those of your leaders. Otherwise, there's something wrong with you. That level of control, that degree of suppression of your authentic self can cause, well, discouragement is putting it mildly, and it's certainly discouragement that lasts more than a day or two. It can last a lifetime.
There are ever so many things that can cause us to be downhearted. Even the fact that we are discouraged can be discouraging. We feel guilty for being discouraged. Faithful men and women faced discouraging circumstances in the past, and so do we. Discouragement is a part of life in this system. We should expect it. Yet, it's important to consider how we view discouragement. Do we view ourselves as helpless victims of discouragement and let ourselves sink into a quagmire of despair and self-pity? Or do we view discouragement as an enemy that we must fight against? We easily recognize that feelings of pride, selfishness, envy, and such things are enemies. We battle against these bad feelings. We don't want them to erode our faith or gain a foothold on our personality. Yet, sometimes we may yield all too willingly to discouragement.
So we can see where this is going. Patrick LaFranca there describing discouragement as an enemy that needs to be fought. Apparently it's awful if you're discouraged. If you're finding something discouraging, or if you're experiencing discouragement, you need to get out of that place immediately. You need to think a happy thought and basically try to forget the reason why you're discouraged. I would argue that this isn't necessarily a healthy position to take. Sometimes when you're discouraged, it's for a reason, and having those feelings of negativity can prompt you to take positive action. So discouragement needn't be something that needs to be just buried or fought. Sometimes it can be a reminder that something is wrong in your life and it needs to be fixed. But ultimately, as is going to become obvious, this isn't just about dealing with discouragement. It's really more to do with reminding Jehovah's Witnesses not to be discouraged about being in a cult, because Patrick LaFranca's advice, as this sermon unfolds, is going to get weirdly specific when it comes to discouragement potentially causing a Jehovah's Witness to lose their faith.
What did Proverbs 24:10 tell us will happen if we allow a day of distress to discourage us? We'll lose our strength. Yes, discouragement can drain us of our spiritual, mental, emotional, and even physical strength. And what can happen if we lose our strength? We can lose our enthusiasm for the truth. We may lose interest in prayer or in personal study. We could slack off in attending meetings. We could develop coldness toward our brothers. Our zeal for evangelizing can weaken. We may even want to give up. We don't want any of those things to happen to us, do we, brothers?
And there we have it. Now it's all coming out in the wash, isn't it? Just as I said earlier, it's not really just about helping people to be positive. It's not just some general talk giving tips on how people can battle discouragement. All of this ultimately is to try to stop Jehovah's Witnesses from losing their faith, from losing their enthusiasm for the truth.
We can lose our enthusiasm for the truth.
Oh no, we wouldn't want people losing their enthusiasm for the truth. Again, if you're feeling discouraged about your predicament as a Jehovah's Witness, or if you are losing enthusiasm for the truth, or you're losing an appreciation for prayer or personal study, or you're starting to notice problems in the congregation, this is not something that you should automatically just bury and pretend it isn't there. Think a happy thought. Sometimes these are things that you need to take action regarding. And if you happen to be experiencing discouragement because of your religion, is it not at least likely that it could be because your religion isn't true, or it's perhaps abusive and exploitative? So we can see straight away, just with minimal scrutiny, that this talk isn't really just a generic talk about helping people be positive. This is a weirdly specific talk telling Jehovah's Witnesses, effectively ordering Jehovah's Witnesses not to lose their faith through discouragement.
Discouragement is a feeling, an emotion. What causes feelings or emotions? An article entitled Negative Emotions, Can You Overcome Them? Was published in the October 8th, 1992 Awake. This article didn't discuss serious cases of depression that may have a medical or physical cause, such as a disease, a reaction to toxins, medications, nutritional deficiencies, allergens, hormonal problems, or bipolar disorder. Rather, it discussed how to overcome moments of discouragement like the temporary day of distress mentioned in Proverbs 24:10. Under the subheading, We Can Control Our Thinking, it stated this: Many who work in the field of mental health maintain that our feelings are caused by our thoughts. It's been said that you cannot experience a feeling without first experiencing a thought. So then, feeling discouraged isn't always the situation that we face, but the negative thoughts that we have about the situation. The first step, then, in fighting discouragement is to identify the negative thoughts. Sometimes we say that we have a train of thought. It means we have a series of thoughts that lead to a certain conclusion or destination, if you will. Now, imagine yourself getting on a literal railroad or subway train. Soon you realize you're on the wrong train. It's taking you to a place you do not want to go to. What do? Do you stay on the train all the way to the wrong destination? Of course not. No, you get off that train at the very next station. But what do you do next? You switch to the right train. Now, figuratively speaking, if you realize that your mind is getting on a train of negative thoughts that's leading to discouragement, can you get off that train? Certainly, But you need to switch to the right train of thought that will lead you to a peaceful state of mind. That's the key. We need to replace negative thoughts with positive, upbuilding, spiritual thoughts.
Yes, we need to get off the negative thought train and get on the positive thought train. Destination happiness. Wow. Well, it's worth remembering that this is supposed to be spiritual food. You know, you can forgive a lot. You can forgive someone like Patrick LaFranca just spouting utter ignorance on mental health and suggesting that Jehovah's Witnesses should police their thoughts and should just identify negative thoughts and get rid of them. You can forgive an ordinary person for giving such simplistic, completely inadequate advice that overlooks the complexities of the human mind, overlooks mental health issues and depression. Yes, he gave a bit of a disclaimer earlier about mental health and about how he's only talking about momentary discouraging thoughts. But define momentary. A moment can last a long time, and a moment can be repeated. A discouraging or negative thought can occur again and again and again, and who's to say it isn't linked to underlying depression? This, unfortunately, is yet another case, and we see it time and time again. A notable example that I'm thinking of is a JW Broadcasting episode that was fronted by Ron Curzon. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear here. Every now and then, the organisation just goes barreling into this incredibly nuanced, complicated field of mental health. And they always get it wrong. And in my view, they always get it wrong because they're doing it for completely the wrong reason. Patrick LaFranca, again, is not interested in how happy you are or in how happy Jehovah's Witnesses are. He's not interested in getting every single Jehovah's Witness off the sad train and putting them on the happy train. He is purely interested. The motivation behind this talk is to stop Jehovah's Witnesses from feeling negative about their beliefs. That's what this is all about. He said as much in his previous comments. And when you're approaching a subject like mental health for the wrong reasons, of course your advice is going to be not just silly, not just inadequate, but quite frankly, reckless and dangerous.
We can change how we think. And because we're imperfect, we have to make these changes continuously. It's not a losing battle. Jehovah has given us powerful weapons to help us make our minds move in the right direction. His powerful word, His mighty Holy Spirit, the power of prayer, and healthful spiritual food from His organization.
Again, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Making sure you're sticking close to Jehovah's organization and the spiritual food it's providing. That's what Patrick LaFranca is really concerned about. He's not really interested in anyone's mental or emotional well-being. He is interested in crushing any negative thoughts that might lead someone away from the Jehovah's Witness religion. And he's doing this by, quite frankly, guilting people over what's going on in their brain. And this is a recurring theme in Jehovah's Witness propaganda. This idea of thought crime, this idea of having the wrong thoughts, which if you think about it is just so Orwellian. How can you really control how the synapses are firing in your brain? Why is that something you should even be required to control? Your brain's going to do its own thing. And to suggest that followers of an entire religion should have mastery over their brains so that they cut out any thoughts that are determined by a group of religious leaders to be wrong or negative is, in my view, not just grossly inappropriate and Orwellian, it's also dangerous because this can lead to a guilt complex, where if someone is struggling with depression or is struggling with anxiety, for clearly defined reasons, because of having discouraging thoughts, as Patrick LaFranca puts it, this individual might be tempted to think, well, the problem is with me, because I'm not switching trains. I'm not getting off the negative thought train and switching onto the positive thought train in time. So the fact that my brain is still dwelling on this issue, which seems to be quite important to me, but maybe it shouldn't be, the fact that my brain is still dwelling on this issue and I don't have mastery over these thoughts means that there's a problem with me. And then what you're doing is, on top of the depression, on top of the anxiety, you're also adding on a guilt complex. That's why this advice from Patrick LaFranca isn't just silly and inappropriate, it's actually dangerous.
A brother has said something quite unkind to you. This has become a day of distress. The thought comes to your mind, how can a brother behave like that and still be in good standing? He's not a good example. Why don't the elders do something about it? Now that's discouragement speaking, calling for us to get on board. If we stay on that negative train of thought, we could lose our spiritual strength. But we still have a choice. Will we replace those negative thoughts with positive ones? We could get our mind on a positive track by saying to ourselves something like this: well, that was an unkind thing for him to say. This is not like him. Maybe my brother just had a bad day. He's as imperfect as I am. I've said unkind things too at times and have regretted it. He's probably feeling the same way. I remember Colossians 3:13 says that we must continue putting up with one another and forgiving one another freely, even if anyone has a cause for complaint against another. Well, he has given me a cause for complaint. But it says Jehovah has freely forgiven us. He has certainly forgiven me countless times. No, I'm not going to allow this to ruin our relationship. How can I help my brother? I'll pray for him. And I'll pray for myself that I don't hold feelings of resentment in my heart.
How manipulative, and again, how telling of what the true motives for this talk really are. Patrick LaFranca here, a helper to the governing body, taking us through the September JW Broadcasting episode, which is supposedly about helping Jehovah's Witnesses think positively and banish discouragement, but it's just becoming obvious at this point that it's nothing really to do with simply helping Jehovah's Witnesses feel happy. This is specifically to do with reminding Jehovah's Witnesses of their duty to silence any doubts or misgivings they may be having about their religion. In this case, to excuse toxic behavior being exhibited by other believers around them, perhaps in their congregation. That's what we've just been hearing. Oh, if someone says something unkind to you or treats you in an unkind way, don't be having any discouraging thoughts. Don't give in to the idea that this person owes an apology or should be held accountable in some way for their toxic behavior. No, the problem is with you for allowing yourself to think about what this person has done from the point of view of how it should be fixed. Clearly, it's you who should be fixed for having a problem to begin with, because there can be no problems between followers. We all need to forgive and forget. If someone does something that's unkind or treats you in an unkind way, you have to forgive them unless it's something that they can be disfellowshipped for, in which case, please come and tell the elders. So if someone says something like, you know what, I don't think this is the truth anymore. I don't think that the governing body are really the faithful slave. That sort of thing you can't forgive and forget. That sort of thing you're supposed to tootle along to your elders and immediately tell them what's happened. And the whole thing will just get blown completely out of proportion. The person will get dragged in to be confronted by elders and could end up in front of a judicial committee, being disfellowshipped for apostasy, for spreading negativity in the congregation. All manner of things could happen in that scenario. But if it's just someone being unkind to you or doing something that's upset you, you need to forgive and forget. You need to extend forgiveness and just pretend the whole thing hasn't happened. And of course, this is expected of Jehovah's Witnesses, even in cases where someone has done something terrible and convinced elders that they're sorry. So, for example, if a Jehovah's Witness is guilty of abusing a child, he can convince the elders that he's sorry and only be reproved. And his victims, who might be in the same congregation, are expected to forgive and forget. That's the Jehovah's Witness culture that Patrick LaFranca is alluding to and encouraging here. It is a toxic culture where essentially anything goes, anything that doesn't threaten the organization in some way, anything that only threatens you or is only harmful to you, if it's being done by a fellow believer, should just be forgiven, should just be treated as though it never happened. And if you're going to dwell on it in any way or feel in any way resentful at this toxic behavior, well, it's your fault.
Your position has been terminated. You've lost your job. It's a day of distress. You're filled with anxious, negative thoughts. How will I care for my family? What will the future bring? Why did Jehovah allow this to happen to me? Where will this train of dark, negative thoughts lead you? Certainly, discouragement will set in, and you will become spiritually weak and exhausted. You still have a choice. You can replace those negative thoughts with thoughts such as these. Okay, I've lost my job. What should I do? Stop serving Jehovah? No. Jesus said that we should not be anxious over material things because Jehovah will provide if we keep his kingdom first in our lives. He also said to keep our lives simple. You know what? There are things that we don't need, so that's what we'll do. Simplify our life and do more in Jehovah's service. Jehovah promises never to abandon us. I'll throw my burden on him, and I know he'll help us make the right decisions.
Again, it's just transparent what all of this is about, isn't it? I love the part where Patrick LaFranca, dealing with this scenario of someone who's just lost their job and the potential for them to think, should I stop serving Jehovah? I love the part where he goes,
Stop serving Jehovah? No.
No! Whatever you do, don't stop serving Jehovah. Isn't that what this is all about? Frankly, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, you should feel insulted right now. Because Patrick LaFranca is coming across as though he's all concerned about your mental well-being and making sure you're not discouraged and making sure you're happy. But isn't it blatantly obvious that he's just terrified that for whatever reason you might experience discouragement that will lead you to stop being a Jehovah's Witness? That's what this is about. And in this particular instance, he's dealing with the prospect of a Jehovah's Witness losing their job. And apparently, a Jehovah's Witness in this situation should just be thinking, well, how can I use this as an opportunity to do more for Jehovah?
So that's what we'll do. Simplify our life and do more in Jehovah's service.
Yeah, who cares if you don't have a job anymore? Who cares if you don't have income or you have significantly less income coming through? Maybe you have a wife, maybe you have kids. Don't worry about all of that. Jehovah's just going to magically take care of everything so long as you get your priorities in order and do more for Jehovah. That's what you should really be thinking about in that situation. I mean, this doesn't come as any surprise. We've heard this narrative time and time again in Jehovah's Witness propaganda. But how selfish, how greedy on the part of the organization. It's all very well for Patrick LaFranca in his JW Broadcasting studio as someone who probably hasn't needed to work for years or decades because he's a governing body helper. It's all very well for him telling millions of Jehovah's Witnesses that if they get laid off, oh, everything's just going to magically sort itself out. He doesn't have to worry about any of these things. He can just go to morning worship every morning and the food's there for him. He has his accommodation paid for. He has his expenses covered. He literally doesn't need to worry about a single thing. And here he is having the gall to lecture millions of Jehovah's Witnesses that if they lose their job for any reason, their priority should be to serve Jehovah's organization more.
Brothers, we're living in the last days of this system of things. We'll have our days of distress. Sometimes these come because of our own imperfection or the imperfection of others. But we also realize that the devil wants to discourage us. Revelation 12:17 tells us that Satan's great anger is directed toward those who observe the commandments of God and have the work of bearing witness concerning Jesus. The devil will try to take advantage of situations and problems that we face to fill us with discouraging thoughts and drain us of our strength. Now we stand at the very threshold of the new world. Let's fight discouragement with all the weapons Jehovah gives us. Continue to study God's Word, making it a part of your daily life. Pray incessantly to Jehovah for His powerful Spirit. Keep close to His organization.
Again, keeping close to the organization is what this is all about, isn't it? The governing body and their helpers are apparently so terrified and insecure about Jehovah's Witnesses becoming discouraged with being a Jehovah's Witness that they've put out this propaganda material which effectively tries to guilt Jehovah's Witnesses into thinking that if they're having discouraging thoughts, it's their fault for not controlling their thoughts, for not getting off the sad train and getting on the happy train. And even in this instance, we've heard suggestion that if a Jehovah's Witness is battling discouraging thoughts, it could be because the devil is somehow winning.
But we also realize that the devil wants to discourage us. The devil will try to take advantage of situations and problems that we face to fill us with discouraging thoughts and drain us of our strength.
Well, that's just wonderful, isn't it? Thank you for your wisdom there, Patrick LaFranca, in telling millions of Jehovah's Witnesses who may be feeling down or discouraged that this may be due somehow to the devil prevailing or to the individual's inability to ward off satanic influence. Yeah, that's a totally rounded, balanced, reasonable approach to take when we're talking about mental health. All he's doing is just layering on the guilt. He's giving Jehovah's Witnesses yet more reasons to hate themselves if they can't get rid of doubts and misgivings about their faith that will more than likely be totally justifiable. And notice too these silly comments about the last days.
Brothers, we're living in the last days of this system of things. Now we stand at the very threshold of the new world.
Oh, well, thanks for being so specific there, Patrick LaFranca. Thanks for really sticking your neck out and letting millions of Jehovah's Witnesses know just where we are in terms of Armageddon coming. Thanks for not being at all vague and refusing to commit to, I don't know, a specific time frame. Isn't this what they always do? It's always vague. It's always unfalsifiable. We're living in the last days. How can anyone disprove that? That's the sort of throwaway remark that any charlatan, any televangelist can make. No one can disprove it, no matter what religion it is, no matter what denomination of Christianity it is. Anyone can get in front of the camera and say, we're living in the last days. We're standing on the threshold of the new world. Who can disprove that? It's an unfalsifiable claim made by a charlatan and a snake oil salesman, and it would be reprehensible enough purely from the point of view of heightening people's doomsday paranoia, but throw in the fact that Patrick LaFranca is using this language to sell terrible advice about mental health, and I find this entire talk deplorable.
My father was arrested in the summer of 1948. Estonia was now under the Soviet regime, but he was still working as a school teacher. The local Department of Education asked him to come by. He went dressed in summer clothes and wearing sandals, and he never came back. At midnight, we heard someone banging at the door. We opened it, and soldiers came in and demanded our passports. We put the passports on the table, and they just said, "You are under arrest." Pagare prison in Tallinn was a place everyone was afraid of, and I was afraid too. I remember that I was taken down the steps to the basement to a long corridor. There was nothing in the cell besides a bench. They slammed the door shut, and that is when I became a little scared. But then I prayed to Jehovah to help me, and a sense of peace came over me. I lay down on the bench and fell asleep. I was given a 10-year prison sentence as an enemy of the state. I saw Jehovah's help in that things were never too hard for me to bear. If things were getting too difficult, something would always change so that I could cope. There was always that feeling that someone was looking after me. I never felt alone or abandoned. If only we could be faithful all the time, then we would also be happy. But sometimes we fail, and so we lose joy. Faithfulness gives joy. In prison, you can stay faithful if you don't leave Jehovah, and if you don't forget to pray, and if you always remember why you are there. You are there because you are on Jehovah's side. I was not a thief. I was not a killer. But I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that is worth being in prison for.
We've been hearing the story of Aino Kethma, a Jehovah's Witness lady from Estonia, relating her experience of being persecuted due to her Jehovah's Witness faith. It goes without saying, I am strongly against the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses. I think it's deplorable when governments, usually totalitarian regimes, as we're seeing now in Russia, effectively trample the human rights, the rights to freedom of worship of any religious minority, including Jehovah's Witnesses. I just find it unfortunate that when this happens, a byproduct is that groups like Jehovah's Witnesses that are themselves abusive and are themselves totalitarian in depriving people their human rights leap on these stories for propaganda value. And that's exactly what we've seen here. There are elements of this story, particularly the concluding remarks in this story, that play directly into the Jehovah's Witness agenda.
Faithfulness gives joy. In prison, you can stay faithful if you don't leave Jehovah, and if you don't forget to pray, and if you always remember why you are there.
I think the message there is very clear, isn't it? Don't leave Jehovah. Jehovah's Witnesses watching this will be thinking, well, if Sister Kethma can stay faithful despite going through that ordeal, I can surely stay faithful to Jehovah, to the organization, when I'm not in prison and when I'm not experiencing that much adversity. It's again blatant manipulation, isn't it? It's trying to sell this idea that under no circumstances should you ever consider quitting. You also have this message woven into Aino's story that she received this magical assistance in staying faithful.
I saw Jehovah's help in that things were never too hard for me to bear. If things were getting too difficult, something would always change so that I could cope.
If things were getting too difficult, something would always change so that I could cope. So there was some kind of divine intervention that I now was blessed with that enabled her to just magically get through, magically cope, no matter how difficult things got. And this actually reminded me of a verse that, I'm going to be honest, my dad was always banging on about. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13. Well, he didn't say, oh, remember, Lloyd, 1 Corinthians 10:13. He just used to use quotes that were very similar to this. And the scripture says, no temptation has come upon you except what is common to men, but God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But along with the temptation, he will also make the way out so that you may be able to endure it. And Aino's experience just reminded me of this, just this repeated mantra of, oh, God will never let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, which of course is nonsense. Plenty of people have to deal with things that they can't bear, including Jehovah's Witnesses. All this does, alluding to what I was saying earlier in Patrick LaFranca's comments, is layer on guilt. Because if you do experience something that you can't bear, if you do experience anxiety or depression that's simply unbearable, all this sort of thinking does is tell you that it's your fault if you can't cope. Because if you can't cope, if you really, really can't cope with what life's throwing at you, whether it's to do with the fact that you're in a cult and you're being asked to chase your tail and do all of these insane rituals and waste your time constantly chasing after something that never quite solidifies. Whether it's to do with your religion, whether it's to do with having to forgive someone who you can't forgive, whether it's to do with anything really, this verse or this sort of idea is inevitably going to make you hate yourself for being unable to cope, because of course you're going to think the reason I can't cope is because I'm not being blessed enough, and I'm not being blessed enough because there's something wrong with me.
Strengthening relationships with our brothers and sisters is especially important as we move deeper into the last days. In our next segment from our series, Lessons from the Watchtower, we'll learn how to build strong friendships.
Friends give me help when I need them the most. They make me laugh, they give me practical assistance whenever I need them. They're just a real source of joy in my life.
When I see my dear friends going through difficult times but still serving Jehovah, that really encourages me with my trials.
Friendship, it just enhances and enriches a person's life. I don't think that friendship is something that I find too natural. I'm shy by nature, I'm hesitant by nature, I feel inadequate by nature.
In my mind, Barak was simply Jeremiah's secretary. I'd never considered that after spending so much time together, it would have allowed them to draw closer as friends.
When I studied the article about Jeremiah and Barak, it made me reflect on friendships that I have. But when you work together for Jehovah, it takes your friendship to another level.
Jehovah's people will have a depth and a dimension to their friendships which will not be shared by those who are not serving Jehovah.
In the article, I really loved the point about communication. Being open with others, it allows them to be open with you. And that just allows a friendship to flourish.
I can have a very bad view of myself. I appreciated the reminder that you will see the bad side of any friend. That's just normal. But good friends remind you of your good side. That is like Jehovah talking and reminding me how much I'm loved by him.
So we're watching the Lessons from the Watchtower segment in the latest September 2021 JW Broadcasting episode, and wow, isn't it cringeworthy? And I'm sure many of you watching this who've had experience in the Jehovah's Witness religion, particularly those of you who are now being shunned by Jehovah's Witnesses because you no longer see things the way they do, you'll just be floored at the level of hypocrisy. The fact that they can celebrate Jehovah's Witness friendship as being uniquely special. You're only going to find it here. When you have friendship in the Jehovah's Witness religion, you're friends for life. Nothing's ever going to happen to your friendship. Things are just going to be really tight forever. Not really the experience, is it? It's not even a case of being shunned when you're disfellowshipped. As anyone who's been a Jehovah's Witness will know, you can be shunned even though you are technically in good standing as a Jehovah's Witness, meaning you haven't been reproved or disfellowshipped, simply because you've stopped attending meetings, or simply because you're not doing something that's quite the way you're supposed to do it. For example, watching the wrong kind of entertainment or wearing the wrong kind of clothes. There are any number of reasons why Jehovah's Witnesses have license to treat someone as bad association and effectively shun them even though they are fellow worshippers, even though they are still in the religion, they haven't yet been disfellowshipped. So for them to produce this sickly propaganda that paints a totally unrealistic picture, it's just laughable. In fact, it's so unrealistic. I love the part where the guy says,
in my mind, Barak was simply Jeremiah's secretary. I'd never considered that after spending so much time together, it would have allowed them to draw closer as friends.
Yeah, in my mind, Barak was simply Jeremiah's secretary. And trust me, I've been thinking a lot about Barak through my years as a Jehovah's Witness. Barak is one of many Bible characters that's constantly on my mind. and whenever I've thought about Barak, perhaps when I've been lying awake at night, unable to sleep, just going through this catalogue of Bible characters that I'm constantly thinking about. Whenever I think about Barak, it never occurs to me that he could have been more than Jeremiah's secretary. He could have been a real friend. Oh, come on. Nobody thinks about Barak. Nobody thinks about obscure Bible characters in that sort of depth. This, for me, was a telltale sign that actually a lot of what we're watching or a lot of what we're hearing is scripted. Or at the very least, witnesses have been encouraged to prepare thoughts, prepare comments that make them sound super spiritual, when in reality, again, how on earth are you going to fixate on obscure Bible characters to that degree? But for me, the worst part of this segment wasn't so much how unrealistic these stories are, or how fake and sickly these fake displays of friendship and affection are. It was more the claim that gets made by this guy who effectively says, it's not just that we have friendship in the Jehovah's Witness religion, our friendship is even better than anything they have outside.
Jehovah's people will have a depth and a dimension to their friendships which will not be shared by those who are not serving Jehovah.
Jehovah's people have a depth and a dimension to their friendships that can't be shared by people who aren't serving Jehovah. Well, that's just preposterous. I mean, depth, if you're talking the depth of a Jehovah's Witness friendship, well, it's paper thin, isn't it? Or at least it evaporates. Any love or friendship evaporates the moment you stop believing as your friend does. So how you can call that sort of conditional friendship deep in any meaningful sense is beyond me. It's just an absurd claim. As to the dimension of Jehovah's Witness friendship, well, I guess it's true that Jehovah's Witnesses have a different dimension to their friendship than those on the outside. They have a cult dimension to their friendship, don't they? They have a conditional dimension to their friendship, as far as I'm concerned, which isn't anything for them to be bragging about. But seriously, it's one thing to say, oh, Jehovah's Witness friendships are just the same as anyone else's, but to go one step further in a group like Jehovah's Witnesses that literally ejects you and where you're literally treated as though you're dead the moment you stop believing, or the moment someone stops believing, for them to make that sort of claim isn't just absurd, it's insulting.
I'd heard that Keith, an older brother, was returning to Britain for some medical treatment. He was much loved, deeply respected. You try and picture and imagine what's going through his mind, his fears, anxieties. I felt very inadequate, but I realised it would be the loving and kind thing to do to speak to him. So we spent some time together, we talked. I felt honoured just to say a prayer with someone like that. I was really touched by Keith's response. He clearly deeply appreciated that, and I felt thrilled to have done just a little something that helped, that supported him.
Is it just me, or is this a non-story? Some guy called Keith returns to Britain for medical treatment. He's much loved and much respected. And this elder guy, I'm assuming he's an elder, sits down in the library with his Bible to do research and decides it's the loving thing to do to visit Keith and have a meal with him and encourage him. And this is a story that's worth reenacting on a JW Broadcasting episode to reinforce this notion that there's no friendship quite like a Jehovah's Witness friendship. I'm sorry, I'm not impressed at all with this story. It's a non-story. Nothing really has happened here at all other than someone's come to the UK to have medical treatment and they've been visited. So what? There's nothing interesting here or nothing that we really learn that establishes that there's anything unique or special about Jehovah's Witness friendship.
I've worked with someone that I never expected to become very close to. Charlotte, she's the opposite to me, but I came to realize quite early on she's an amazing listener. Charlotte is more than a friend. She's now family.
I love my family very, very much. At the moment, I am the only one in my family who is one of Jehovah's Witnesses. But I've never felt I was truly alone. Jehovah always provided brothers, sisters, mothers, uncles, aunties. He's always given me everyone I needed.
I feel I've had a lesson powerfully reinforced of the blessings of genuine friendship. When we make an effort just to give Jehovah a little something, he can add his blessing.
In my experience, the person you don't expect actually turns out to be a very special friend. When you work with different brothers and sisters, I really appreciate they are gifts from Jehovah.
And he'll give all of you into our hands.
Working hard for Jehovah and being genuine, that will attract other brothers and sisters. We will never forget the friendships that we make right now. Jehovah will use those friendships to help us through the Great Tribulation.
Well, thankfully, thus ends this exciting installment of Lessons from the Watchtower, in which we've learned that apparently it's not just that you can have friendships in the Jehovah's Witness religion. These friendships are superior to anything that anyone can experience outside the organization. They have greater depth and dimension, apparently, even though, as I've said, you can be dropped like a ton of bricks the moment you express doubt, or the moment you stop attending meetings or stop doing the preaching work. You'll be singled out as bad association. You'll be treated as though there's something wrong with you, as though you're defective in some way, even though we know this is the true nature of life in the Jehovah's Witness religion. They think that just by putting out this sickly sweet propaganda, all will be forgotten, and they can just somehow convince each other being other Jehovah's Witnesses, that there's no friendship quite like a Jehovah's Witness friendship. Well, I'm not buying it. All we've heard there are vacuous statements, fluffy little sound bites that don't in any way reflect the reality of relationships within this organization.
Those helpful suggestions appeared in the November 2019 issue of the Watchtower. That article emphasized the importance of forging strong friendships now before the end of this system comes. During the Great Tribulation, God's enemies may try to disrupt our unity, but we can be confident that nothing will break our bonds of love. Our friendships will last not only through the end of this system, but for all eternity.
If you say so, Patrick. Well, doesn't this just give us more evidence of how paranoid and desperate this organization is, everything's got to apparently tie into the last days and the Great Tribulation and the need for Jehovah's Witnesses to stick as close to the organization as possible.
During the Great Tribulation, God's enemies may try to disrupt our unity, but we can be confident that nothing will break our bonds of love.
Yes, nothing will break our bonds of love, apart from someone no longer believing as we do, in which case we're going to have to shun them and stop loving them. When you tie in that talk by David Splain at the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention about apostates and the media being out to get Jehovah's Witnesses, isn't it obvious that they are running scared? They are desperate. And they want Jehovah's Witnesses to feel as though the end is near. We're on the threshold of the new world, as Patrick LaFranca said earlier, the last days of the last days, and things are going to get worse and worse. So we need to stick as close as possible to the organization. In this case, they're making out that the organization is unique in its friendships that are apparently unbreakable, even though that's just not the experience, not the honest experience of anyone who's spent any time in this religion. They can jump up and down and they can persuade themselves that theirs is a loving organization where people look out for each other, where friendships will last for all eternity. But that's simply not the lived experience of the many who've seen their Jehovah's Witness friendships evaporate simply for daring to no longer believe.
Music expresses things that you can't express in any other way. It is so powerful. It's just an amazing gift. Before I got the truth, I lived for music. I played hard and heavy rock and roll in bars and clubs around the New York City area for many years. To me, I just found it to be a very depressing atmosphere. But then I developed a love for classical music, and I would practice 6 hours a day. I applied to the Juilliard School for the Performing Arts. I was accepted, but I did not attend. But deep inside, something was missing. My life changed drastically on February 16th, 1973, because that's when I learned the truth in a taxi cab. I came to Bethel on February 16th, 1979. When I first came to Bethel, I had to put music aside for a little bit. I started working in the press room, and that was a completely different environment for me. I also worked with landscaping. I worked in construction over at Wallkill, and I also worked with drafting and engineering. These were things I was not good at, but I really felt I learned so much from doing these things that it really kind of groomed me. And I think when Jehovah looked at me, he says, well, we got somebody we have to work with here. Just as you tune your instrument so it can be played in tune, Jehovah tunes you. He teaches us to keep things in their place and put worship of him first, because that's where it's proper. When Jehovah became number one, everything else took its place.
When Jehovah became number one, that's when everything took its place. So says Bill Mullane. We're hearing his story in the September 2021 JW Broadcasting episode. This is actually a new feature where they do a Where Are They Now style interview, because Bill Mullane's story first appeared over 35 years ago in The Awake. If you're interested, it was the 1985 Awake, August 8th, pages 14 to 17. And I've looked up his story. It had the title, I lived for music. And quite clearly, what we're being told here is that Bill was mistaken in living for music. What he should have been doing, of course, is living for Jehovah's organization.
Back in 1981, I met my wife when I was playing music at a wedding. We fell in love with each other. As our love for Jehovah goes through the years, our love for our mates grows. Now, I didn't leave music completely because I still had a love for it. I still practiced as much as I could within my Bethel schedule and within my whole theocratic schedule. I don't miss it being number one. I just feel happier now that it's in its proper place. In 1995, when I first came over to Patterson, I was working with audio-video. Since 2016, I've been working with music and working as a music editor and as a music composer. Working with brothers on a piece of music, it's a real blessing and a privilege. Jehovah's letting us take advantage of a tool that we all like to listen to, but now using it in a way that praises Him. Our whole motive is not to earn money. Our whole motive in using music is to glorify our Heavenly Father, Jehovah. And we get music from all different cultures, and it really unites Jehovah's people. Music, it has a very special power in being able to reach the heart. Now, there's time where we just sit around and we just jam and play, and you're really talking and communicating with each other. There's nothing like it. I'm happier now knowing that I've lived a clean life. Do I have any regrets? I have no regrets. What I did when I was 22 years old was the best thing that ever happened to me, because that's how I came to know Jehovah, and that's how I was able to find a balance in my life. Our happiness doesn't depend on our job. Our happiness really depends upon our spirituality and our relationship with Jehovah. That's what life is all about. It's a wonderful life.
Channeling Louis Armstrong there towards the end. It's a wonderful life. It's a wonderful world when you're a Jehovah's Witness, when all you need to worry about, particularly in Patterson, because this is, after all, a Bethelite, particularly in Patterson, where you can just immerse yourself in doing nothing but serving the organization, that's a wonderful life. That's a life that everyone should aspire to. Well, you're welcome to say that, Bill Mullane. I would suggest that you're only ever going to say that it's wonderful. You're only ever going to say that you have no regrets when you're literally making a propaganda piece that's praising the organization that fooled you to begin with. You're never going to be honest. You're never going to be candid and say, actually, it's a bit rubbish sometimes being in Patterson. And I've noticed a few things here in Patterson that would indicate that actually this isn't God's one and only true organization, because I've witnessed corruption or I've witnessed the governing body saying or doing things. You're never going to be honest about that, are you, on camera in a JW Broadcasting episode? You're only ever going to wax lyrical about the organization. And I find it reprehensible that young people are here being misled and duped into thinking that the only meaningful way that they can pursue a career is through the organization, doing something that benefits the organization in some way. Actually, there were three things in Bill Mullane's interview towards the end there that really stood out. He said one thing that I agree with, which is,
music, it has a very special power in being able to reach the heart.
Well, that's definitely true. In fact, you're kind of stating the obvious there. We've seen that time and time again in Jehovah's Witness propaganda. They will use music to pull on the heartstrings. There's a reason why during a testimonial or during a tearful reenactment, they will play soft piano music. It's because it elicits an emotional response. Watchtower isn't stupid. They know how this works. of course they're going to devote resources to their video production and to the music side of things. They would be crazy to pay no attention to music and to overlook the obvious power of music to hook people emotionally. Because as I've said many times before, if you can get people hooked emotionally, you no longer need to persuade them. You no longer need to make logical sense because they're already invested, at least emotionally, in whatever it is you're trying to peddle. Another thing Bill Mullane says is,
our whole motive is not to earn money. Our whole motive in using music is to glorify our Heavenly Father, Jehovah.
I found this a bit of an insult to professional musicians. So if you're a professional musician who's earning a living by playing an instrument, that's somehow a bad thing. Because of course, if you can play an instrument, or if you're musically gifted, the only useful career that you can pursue is that of producing Jehovah's Witness propaganda. That seems to be the message we're hearing here. Again, it's an insult to those who make a living, including, I'm sure, some Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm sure it's difficult to be a professional musician as a Jehovah's Witness, and there will be no end of judging going on and no end of people kind of looking down at you, your fellow brothers and sisters looking down at you thinking, you know, why are you a professional musician? This is pursuing fame in Satan's system of things. So what? What's so bad about earning a living playing an instrument? Why are you only allowed to earn a living if it's something that's menial or something that doesn't give you any form of recognition? It's a similar thing whenever they're dealing with soccer. I don't know whether you've noticed. Apparently it would be unthinkable for a Jehovah's Witness to be a professional footballer or a professional athlete. It's unthinkable for any Jehovah's Witness to do something that gives them any amount of personal recognition. We can understand why this is. Obviously, this is a cult that wants all of the praise and all of the adulation to go to just 8 dudes. The governing body are the only ones on the planet worthy of fame and adulation. Everyone else just has to disappear into the background, and if they happen to be good musicians, that means not pursuing a career as a musician. And finally, I also wanted to pick up on Bill Mullane saying,
our happiness really depends upon our spirituality and our relationship with Jehovah. That's what life is all about.
That's what life is all about. Our happiness depends on our spirituality and our relationship with Jehovah. Bear in mind the tone of this JW Broadcasting episode has been an attempt, a really clumsy, ham-fisted attempt to address mental health and suggest that if you have any discouraging thoughts, you should get rid of them. You should get off the sad train and get on the happy train, or however it was that Patrick LaFranca put it. They have the gall in an episode that attempts to deal with mental health. They have the gall to say you're only going to be happy if you're a devoted Jehovah's Witness. Well, that is plainly nonsense. Again, you only need to spend time in a Jehovah's Witness congregation to realize that people aren't happy. I can distinctly remember in my years as a Jehovah's Witness encountering so many Jehovah's Witnesses who were suffering with depression or suffering with anxiety. There's nothing unique or nothing special in terms of your mental well-being about being a Jehovah's Witness, and yet Bill Mullane has the gall to suggest this. Of course, the organization is going to include this cute soundbite. It may be cute, but there isn't an ounce of truth to it. And actually, it's incredibly manipulative and coercive, not to mention reckless, to suggest that happiness is part and parcel of being a Jehovah's Witness.
The Apostle Paul wrote that Jehovah loves a cheerful giver. That was the subject of a recent morning worship by Brother Anthony Morris of the governing body.
We're going to talk about money. Now, the fact is we never beg for money, but that's not to say we can't talk about money in Jehovah's organization, the earthly part. So it is long-standing. There is a balance here. Going back to the Watchtower, I said a very long time ago, we have never considered it proper to solicit money for the Lord's cause after the common custom, referring to Christendom. It is our judgment that money raised by the various begging devices in the name of our Lord is offensive, unacceptable to him. It does not bring his blessing either upon the givers of the work accomplished or the work accomplished. So we do not need to be coerced into giving. We gladly use our money to support kingdom activities. So that stands to this day, but we'd never want to come to the conclusion you can't talk about money.
We're watching governing body member Tony Morris, who's making a cameo in the September 2021 JW Broadcasting episode, apparently to remind Jehovah's Witnesses of their privilege of giving money to the organization. This isn't begging, though. As we've just heard, apparently it's different when it's simply talking about money. Tony isn't begging you for your money, ladies and gentlemen. He's simply reminding you of your duty to give money to the organization. It's begging, really, isn't it? I like that he referred to Charles Taze Russell's words in an earlier publication. I think I did actually hunt down the Watchtower in question. I think it was an 1889 Watchtower. I can only refer again to the famous quote, in my view, the definitive quote from Charles Taze Russell on the issue of funding and donations, which is from the August 1879 Watchtower. We've shown it before. Hopefully Tibor will give you the quote again if he's gracious. Do not suppose these remarks to be an appeal for money. No, Zion's Watchtower has, we believe, Jehovah for its backer, and while this is the case, it will never beg nor petition men for support. When he who says, all the gold and silver of the mountains are mine, fails to provide necessary funds, we will understand it to be time to suspend the publication. I feel these words are kind of coming back to haunt the organization, because what are they increasingly doing? I mean, you can call it just talking about money if you like, but as I've argued, you reach a point, if you're repeatedly talking about money, where it can be said that you are indeed begging. And let's remember that in the 2021 Powerful by Faith convention, we of course had the talk by Gaius Glockentin, where he was reminding Jehovah's Witnesses of their privilege of getting out their wallets and throwing cash at the organization. Only a month later, in the September 2021 JW Broadcasting episode, here we have the exact same message again. How many times do Jehovah's Witnesses need to hear this particular message or this particular counsel in the space of a few weeks? And more importantly, how many times does the organization get to do this within such a short space of time before it becomes begging? I would argue we're long past that stage. The organization has been openly begging for years now. We've had cartoons where Caleb and Sophia have been enlisted to remind Jehovah's Witness children that they should be giving their ice cream money for the organization. We've had repeated Watchtower articles We've had Stephen Lett saying we have more money going out of the organisation than we have going in at this time in the May 2015 JW Broadcasting episode. We've had Gaius Glockentin's talk. Now we've got a 10-minute morning worship segment. Yes, it's 10 minutes long. I timed it. All about this privilege of giving money to Jehovah. How many times do they get to remind Jehovah's Witnesses of this privilege of giving before we can call it like it is and say this organization is quite clearly begging?
Money has to be discussed in these last days, this system. It meets a response in all things. So I thought we'd take some thoughts from the Kingdom book, 3 reasons why we're willing and so willing to give. Some beautiful thoughts. Well, the first one is connected with doing what's pleasing in Jehovah's eyes. And finding the 2 Corinthians reference here is so crucial to helping people understand that we don't beg for money, but nonetheless we have to talk about it from time to time. And here in the 9th chapter, donations and such was being discussed, and then this profound inspired thought, which is reflecting Jehovah's thinking, is in verse 7, 2 Corinthians 9:7. Let each one do just as he has resolved in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So there we have it. We're happy to give to Jehovah. When needs arise and the organization brings it to our attention, for example, disasters and such, like we had at the annual meeting, the report about the increase in disasters and the millions of dollars that of God's kingdom money was used to help our brothers. But when it comes to giving, it's an individual responsibility, as the verse says, resolved in his heart or her heart, not grudgingly, and the footnote addresses the word reluctantly. So it's not like we embarrass people, beg them, look, you're well off, why aren't you giving more? Well, that's not their business. So that's not our business. We have to resolve in our own heart. So while we discuss money, we never come across like we're putting people and trying to get them to even grudgingly give just so we get the money. That's not this organization. Of course, Christendom, they are experts at begging for money.
Am I the only one, viewers, or is Tony just a little bit more slurry than usual? If you're watching this as one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you have no clue what might be causing Tony Morris's, in my view, noticeable slurring, you might want to check out Bottlegate. Here's a picture I keep on my desk showing Tony Morris in said video where he is found in a liquor store on a Sunday shopping, using his money to buy very expensive alcohol. Apparently it's one rule for Tony, it's another rule for everyone else. Everyone else needs to be thinking about how they're going to give their funds. Caleb and Sophia need to be thinking about going without ice cream for Jehovah, but Tony Morris gets to lavish funds on whiskey on a Sunday morning in the liquor store. But that aside, again, I just cannot help but notice the double talk here. He keeps talking about how this is just talking about money. It's not begging, apparently, when you're repeatedly talking about money. I'm not sure you can say that. I mean, they introduced this verse, or he introduces this verse in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7. Let each one do just as he has resolved in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. How can it be not under compulsion if you're repeatedly, within the space of a few weeks, getting reminders from the organization of the privilege to give? Again, Convention Talk by Gaius Glockentin, and just a few weeks later, Jehovah's Witnesses are sitting down for their JW Broadcasting episode, and here's this whole issue being thrown at them again. How are they not being placed under compulsion if they're repeatedly being told the same thing in a short space of time? I would argue that they are under compulsion. I would argue that they are being compelled to part with their money. But interestingly, Tony Morris tries to introduce this idea that it's not begging so long as the organisation aren't literally going round and hounding people for money on an individual basis.
So it's not like we embarrass people, beg them, look, you're well off, why aren't you giving more? Well, that's not their business. That's not our business. We have to resolve in our own heart.
So that's apparently the answer. That's how the organisation squares the circle and is able to rip up this long-standing policy established by Charles Taze Russell of not begging. So long as the begging is happening universally, so long as all Jehovah's Witnesses are being reminded of their privilege to give money to Jehovah at the same time, apparently it's not begging. Apparently it would only be begging if individuals were being approached and told to give to the organisation. Isn't that interesting? Moving the goalposts, I would argue that the organisation is very much begging and very much placing Jehovah's Witnesses under compulsion when they're getting the same message over and over again, even in the space of just a few weeks.
So we love Jehovah. We want to be the kind of person that he loves. And you notice that beautiful expression, God loves a cheerful giver. One translation put it nicely, God loves people who love to give. And that's true. So we want Jehovah to love us. So this money we might have, whatever amounts, depending on our own personal circumstances, we're happy to give to kingdom interests. So that's the first one. We make these donations because of our love for Jehovah. Now the second one, this is interesting, a heart-searching principle found back in the Mosaic Law. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 16, if you would, please. And Deuteronomy 16. And you'll see the connection. While this applied to the Jews at that time, you'll see how it applies to us in our day. We're going to read verse 16 and then verse 17 of Deuteronomy 16. 3 times a year, all your males should appear before Jehovah your God in the place that he chooses at the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of booths. Now notice, and none of them should appear before Jehovah empty-handed. The gift that each one brings should be in proportion to the blessing that Jehovah your God has given you. So you have to let that sink in. And this is what Jehovah wanted to be conveyed to the Israelites that would attend these festivals. None. Now, he didn't say if you're well off, you've had a great year, as opposed to some that were poor, you still had issues back at that time, even though it was Jehovah's nation. But he said none should appear empty-handed. So that takes in all of us, whatever our circumstances are, whether at Bethel or in the field. Jehovah doesn't approve coming empty-handed.
Jehovah doesn't approve coming empty-handed. Thank you, Tony, for showing us a blatant Bible contradiction. 1 minute he's reading a verse in 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7, saying that people should be giving not under compulsion, in other words, voluntarily. And if it's truly voluntary, if it's truly not under compulsion, then giving should be optional, period. You know, if you're not in a position to give anything, you shouldn't be forced to give anything. But then Tony digs out this verse in Deuteronomy that literally says, and none of them should appear before Jehovah empty-handed. So which is it, Tony? Is it not under compulsion, or is it very much under compulsion to the extent where there's a Bible verse that says no one should appear before Jehovah empty-handed?
And what would help us to not come empty-handed, in this case back in Israel or in our time either? Notice verse 17, and this is a lot to think about. The gift that each one brings should be in proportion to the blessing that Jehovah your God has given you. So there we have it. You stop and reflect that they were supposed to do that, and we can do the same throughout the year. Reflect on the blessings that Jehovah God has given us. You got to take time to do that. You have to give that consideration. The gift that each one brings should be in proportion to the blessing. So adding up these blessings, then we're happy to give out of our material possessions. So profound thought there, and something to reflect on so that we don't find ourselves, when it comes to contributions on a monthly basis or whatever, empty-handed. Well, I'm doing so much here and there. Well, money meets a response in all things, and you have to take that into account, even if we're in the poor range.
Even if we're in the poor range. Poor people, Tony wants your cash. I mean, really. And make no mistake, there will be really poor Jehovah's Witnesses watching this in developing countries, because JW Broadcasting can be watched in any country, really, can't it? There will be Jehovah's Witnesses watching this who are living on less than $1 a day or thereabouts. They're literally scraping together whatever they can find. And daily survival is a challenge for them. And this lunacy, this craziness from Tony Morris, I mean, how reckless and irresponsible to even tell people in that desperate situation there are no exceptions. Everybody has to give something, even if you're in the poor range. Well, it's all very well you saying this, Tony, as someone who doesn't have to actually work for a living. You're a cult leader. You wake up every morning and go down to morning worship. You have your coffee there waiting for you. You have your food there waiting for you. You don't have to actually earn any of it. You just live this extremely comfortable life. Look, I'm not one of these people who says he's living a life of luxury, although I'm sure it is a luxury existence compared to, again, the poorest in our world. But he's living a life of an extremely privileged individual who doesn't want for anything, who gets everything he could conceivably want on a plate, and apparently has an excess of personal funds that allows him to go to the liquor store on a Sunday morning and splash out on $80, $100 bottles of single malt scotch. So it's all very well someone in this situation telling a poor Jehovah's Witness in a developing country who's living in a mud hut and who can't remember the last time they had a proper meal, you need to give something. But what arrogance, what total detachment from reality, and how much we've departed, really, from what was described in those early Watchtowers by Charles Taze Russell. When we start begging, when we start petitioning for money, we'll have to suspend publication. Well, what have we just heard? And I like the part where Tony Morris says,
so profound thought there, and something to reflect on so that we don't find ourselves, when it comes to contributions on a monthly basis or whatever, empty-handed. Well, I'm doing so much here and there. Well,
I'm doing so much here and there. I know it's difficult to make sense of what he's saying because he's slurring so badly. More than likely, if you ask me, because there was some whiskey in his cornflakes. I know it's difficult to make sense of what he's saying, But he seems to be suggesting that some Jehovah's Witnesses might take the attitude, well, I'm doing so much already, I shouldn't have to give even more in terms of monetary giving. And I'm going to be completely honest. That was my attitude as a Jehovah's Witness, as a Jehovah's Witness pioneer who was completely broke. I was so broke as a pioneer that for years after moving to Croatia, Deanna and I were having to pay off debts because we just got so deep into debt, assuming that it wouldn't matter if we ran up huge credit card bills or if we went into overdrafts, because Armageddon was coming any moment and Jehovah would provide. That was our attitude. And because I was so broke, I reasoned within myself, well, my giving is in the form of my preaching, is in the form of my pioneer ministry. That's clearly not the attitude Tony Morris wants you to have, by the way. But I'm glad, looking back, that that was my attitude. And I would be furious, absolutely furious, if I had given a lot of money, even though I was broke and even though I was running up debts. It would give me even more anger now than I already have. And I already have a lot of resentment at the position this organization has put me in, not just in terms of setting me back financially, but more in terms of my family relationships. I would be enraged if on top of all of that, it had been compounded by, oh, I gave hundreds or thousands of pounds to the organization. I'm glad that I got out with having to say that. But this talk absolutely torpedoes any idea that that's acceptable. So if you're watching this as a Jehovah's Witness, including a Jehovah's Witness in a mud hut somewhere, you're going to be thinking, I've got to give something. I don't have anything to give, but I've got to give something. And what I want to know is, Tony Morris is here saying, we shouldn't be tempted into thinking that because we're doing a lot, that lets us off the hook. Well, I think having said that, having made that claim or having made that assertion as a governing body member, it behooves Tony Morris to tell us how much he's giving to the organisation and what his finances are, because he's just said everyone needs to give. And it's not an excuse to say, I'm doing a lot for the organisation. I'm sure that people like Tony Morris would be at least in a position to reason, well, look at all of the work that I'm contributing towards the organisation as a governing body member. Well, show us the proof that you are living in such a way that you're giving despite also giving in terms of your time and energy. He's not going to do that. This guy is a crook and a charlatan as far as I'm concerned. If there was any doubt whatsoever, that doubt well and truly dissipated when we saw that Bottlegate video. So for him to have the gall to tell even the poorest in society that they need to be sending in their money, even though he's splashing the cash at Bottle King, it's absolutely deplorable.
We give and have voluntary contributions because we love our Lord Jesus. And notice what he stated here, John chapter 14 and verse 23. In answer, Jesus said to him, if anyone loves me, he will observe my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our dwelling with him. So appreciate how Jesus put it, if. So it's a responsibility that falls on us individually. But if we say we love Jesus, and we're not like Christendom with this proclamation of their love for Jesus, they really don't even know the real Jesus, frankly, till you get an accurate knowledge of the truth. But if we're in the truth, we're dedicated, baptized servants of him, if we really love him, we're going to observe his word. Now, that means not just carrying out the kingdom, putting our time and energy into it. It also means money. we are willing to donate money to support the worldwide work.
This talk just gets more and more manipulative the longer it goes on. I mean, what's he talking about now? If you want to be loved, give us your cash. Well, hang on a minute. You were reading 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7, which says that no one should be giving under compulsion. Under compulsion. And now you're digging out a verse from John chapter 14, which, by the way, says nothing at all about money. Jesus doesn't say anything about money here. But the argument Tony's making is, if you want Jesus to love you, you'd better give me, on his behalf, your money. Divert your funds, or as much money as you can, to the organization I'm conveniently a spokesperson for and living quite well off. And hey, guess what? As a reward, you get to be loved by Jesus. That's how he's using John 14, verse 23. If anyone loves me, he will observe my word, and my Father will love him. Again, I don't think this verse has anything to do with money, but used in the way Tony Morris is using it, given the application that Tony Morris is giving this verse, it's incredibly narcissistic to say to someone, do as I say, or I'm going to stop loving you.
We're not ashamed to admit that this takes money to have these things operate, branches and supporting all of the preaching work, the kingdom work, all these other initiatives that we've had in recent years. It takes money. You can't go to people that you buy things from and say, well, look, this is a nonprofit organization, trying to shame them, and what can you give it to? No, they want their money to be paid for the various things that we have to use to accomplish Jehovah's work. So something to keep in mind, those three things there. Our love for Jehovah, we want to do what's pleasing to him. We count our blessings from Jehovah. Then we have our love for Christ Jesus, see, and we want to do whatever we can. So how you do it with the financial contributions, that's a personal decision. And Jehovah dignifies us with that. We never want to be shaming somebody that we think they should be doing thus and so. That's a personal matter. But keep in mind, sometimes if you are poor, remember the widow. So she didn't come there to the temple empty-handed. She didn't have much, but Jehovah loved her. Jesus loved her for giving what she had. So even when we're poor, we're expected to give monetarily. And it's because we love Jehovah, love Jesus, and we appreciate all the blessings we've received during the year and are grateful.
I'm not so annoyed at the thought of most Jehovah's Witnesses in well-off countries watching this talk and feeling pressured to give their money. I'm really more annoyed, enraged even, at the thought of, again, Jehovah's Witnesses in poorer countries where they really are living hand to mouth and they have nothing already. The thought of Jehovah's Witnesses in this situation, at this level of desperation, watching this JW broadcasting episode, perhaps at their local Kingdom Hall or at the home of another witness on their TV, and feeling as though they owe the organization their money, even though they really need to be keeping hold of it and using it for themselves. That's what really enrages me about this talk. Most of the rest of it I can kind of shrug off and in fact take some delight in, because let's face it, viewers, this talk, we can add this to the long list of evidence that this organization is hemorrhaging money and is struggling financially. I'm sorry, the organization I grew up in would have nothing to do with this sort of rhetoric. This is not the religion that I grew up in. We always held to the Charles Taze Russell mantra that there would never be any begging, and that if people gave money, it would always be voluntary, Well, how on earth can you say this isn't begging when it's repeated, when it's in talk after talk, video after video? By the way, you have this privilege of giving money. And even in this video, going to the degree of saying everyone should give. There are no excuses. Even the poorest should be giving money. This is just a world away from the organization I grew up in. And though I am enraged at the thought of the poorest Jehovah's Witnesses being put in an even worse position than they already are by listening to what this bloated, slurring buffoon is saying, I do at least draw comfort from the fact that there's evidence here, isn't there, that this organization is genuinely struggling and is genuinely in panic mode due to there not being enough cash. How on earth could you justify them putting out this sort of material if they weren't completely desperate?
As we've discussed, we fight discouragement by replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts. Let's do that right now. Please enjoy our new music video. It's entitled, Always Rejoice.
Always rejoice. Always rejoice. Always rejoice. Always rejoice. Family and brotherhood. Unity feels so good. Beautiful gifts from God, building a bond no one can break. Freedom may be denied, but joy deep inside no one can take. Sing to Jehovah with all your heart. Serve him through all your days. No greater joy could there be than this. No matter what we face, always rejoice. Always rejoice. Always rejoice. Always rejoice. Earth will be a paradise for all eternity. Jesus' loving sacrifice truly sets us free.
So we've been watching the new music video, Always Rejoice, and wasn't that a catchy tune? I honestly enjoyed it. I found myself tapping my foot to that beat. I think it's the same artist or the same singer who did the We're Your Family song and also the Run the Race song. Very similar style, isn't there, to those previous music videos? Of course, that's not to say that this isn't an incredibly manipulative music video. All of them are. The message here being, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're going to be happy all the time because look at all of these smiling faces. And of course, they're never going to show the unhappy faces, are they? Or they're never going to show the tense atmosphere in the back room of a kingdom hall when someone's having their judicial committee. Or they're not going to show parents in tears because their child is leaving the home having just been disfellowshipped. They have a narrative. The narrative is being in the Jehovah's Witness religion makes you happy. So of course it's just going to be happy smiling faces of Jehovah's Witnesses. I say Jehovah's Witnesses, it wouldn't surprise me if quite a lot of the footage that we've just seen is actually just stock footage. I mean, I can't prove that, it's just speculation, but it would be interesting if at least one or two of those faces were actually worldly people because it was stock footage, worldly people who are doomed for annihilation when Armageddon comes. At least one of those smiling faces made me recoil in disgust, because we had footage there of a child being baptized. Tibor will show it overlaid across this video if he is gracious. Yeah, I always hate seeing young people, minors, children, committing themselves to this organization. It's an organization that is increasingly okay with child baptism. It's always had a problem with infant baptism, but apparently once you get to the age of 6 or 7, well, that's when it's okay to pledge the rest of your life to an organization, a decision that you can be held for to your dying breath, even though it means you potentially being separated from your family. So that was obviously quite jarring. I also found it interesting where they were showing the footage from entertainment evenings. Again, Tibor will hopefully show you as an overlay this incredible footage of witnesses up on stage doing these dance routines and these performances in front of huge crowds. I actually think it's a little bit dishonest to portray life as a Jehovah's Witness in this way, because what they're showing here is only accessible to an elite of Jehovah's Witnesses, or the very small minority of witnesses who are tasked with entertaining them. So how it works is, if there's an international convention, usually I'm not talking about in terms of COVID and social distancing and that sort of thing, but under normal circumstances, when there's an international convention, you can apply to be a delegate. You'll still have to pay for your travel. In fact, I would argue you have to pay more for your travel and more for your accommodation, because it's all a little bit of a racket. The organization makes a tidy margin on the money that you spend because it all goes through them and they get to negotiate the rates. But you have to apply for the privilege to do this. You have to apply to be a delegate at one of these international conventions. And because you are forking out all of this cash and giving it directly to the organization, just for the privilege of going to an event where you're guaranteed to see a governing body member, what happens is the organization pulls out all of the stops, throws out the rule book in terms of what is or isn't acceptable inside a kingdom hall, for example, and will do anything to keep their delegates entertained, so that you have these huge events where you have all the dancing on stage, you have the large crowds swaying their arms. That's not typical when you're a Jehovah's Witness. The vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses will never experience an entertainment evening for convention delegates. I never experienced one. I'm sure many watching this will never have experienced one. Some will, but it's disingenuous as far as I'm concerned to show these entertainment evenings as though this is what life as a Jehovah's Witness is all about. It just isn't. I actually discussed this whole weird Jehovah's Witness subculture of entertaining delegates in my video Dancing for Jehovah, thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious. So please check that video out if you want to know more about this weird thing where witnesses dance on stage. There's even footage of people doing line dancing on a Kingdom Hall platform in that video, believe it or not. Again, entirely non-typical for the Jehovah's Witness experience. But all of that aside, and forgetting the manipulative side of this music video, we heard there family and brotherhood. Unity feels so good. We want unity. Despite all of those culty messages hidden away in the lyrics and hidden away in the footage, let's face it, it's a catchy tune.
Quebec is rich with wildlife, moose, caribou, beavers, wolves, and the snowy owl. Jehovah's people began preaching here in the 1920s. Government opposition, stirred up by the clergy, began almost immediately. In 1946, our brothers held a 16-day campaign to publicize the state's disregard for freedom of worship. That led to the arrest of hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses. The first to be tried were Brother Emmy Boucher and his 2 daughters, one of whom was just 11 years of age. In 1950, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in their favor, legally establishing the right of Jehovah's Witnesses to preach in Quebec. Today, our brothers are taking full advantage of this freedom. Montreal is the province's largest city. Publishers enjoy public witnessing in Montreal's popular tourist areas, subway system, and ports, where workers come from many countries. They preach to students attending the city's 8 universities and many colleges. In Quebec City, they even preach in front of the government buildings where decades ago laws were written to stop our work.
So yes, preaching to students in Quebec, trying to recruit them into an organisation that frowns on higher education. Yeah, that's charming. That's really charming. So anyway, we've reached the end of this month's JW Broadcasting episode. And what we usually have at the end of these productions is like a postcard from abroad thing. And this month for September 2021, as we've seen, it's Quebec, and they don't waste a moment to bring up the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses in Quebec in the 1940s. I actually have in my collection the pamphlet that was referred to there. I'm going to try and show it there on camera. Hopefully that's showing up okay. Quebec's Burning Hate, it was called, for God and Christ and freedom is the shame of all Canada. There was actually another one, Quebec, you have failed your people. I'm trying to be very gentle with them because, as you can see, they're very old browned bits of paper that are a bit flaky around the edges, so I'm trying to hold them very carefully. Let me just give you a little glimpse of the nature of this material. I'm going to read to you from the final few words of this particular pamphlet. Quebec, Jehovah's Witnesses are telling all Canada of the shame you have brought on the nation by your evil deeds. In English, French, and Ukrainian languages, this leaflet is broadcasting your delinquency to the nation. You claim to serve God, you claim to be for freedom, yet if freedom is exercised by those who disagree with you, you crush freedom by mob rule and Gestapo tactics. Hasn't aged very well, that, has it? I can think of an organisation that routinely crushes freedom and anyone who disagrees with them. Though your words are, your actions are not in harmony with that for which democracies have just fought a long and bloody global war, and your claims of serving God are just as empty, for your actions find no precedent in the exemplary course laid down for Christians by his Son, Christ Jesus. You should remember that though Christ Jesus and early Christians were often mobbed, they never under any circumstances meted out mob violence. What counts is not whom you claim to serve, but whom you actually do serve by deeds. The Catholic Version Bible says, "Know you not that to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants are whom you obey." Quebec, you have yielded yourself as an obedient servant of religious priests, and you have brought forth bumper crops of evil fruits. Now why not study God's word, the Bible, and yield yourself in obedience to its commands, and see how bounteous a crop of good fruits reflecting love for God and Christ and freedom you will bring forth. The eyes of Canada are upon you, Quebec. Really shoddily written, that, isn't it? They've denounced Quebec at the end there. Quebec, you have yielded yourself as an obedient servant of religious priests, and you've brought forth evil fruits. And then they say, but why not study the Bible to an entire province? Just doesn't work, does it? It's very, I don't know, it's very self-indulgent language and not remotely tempered. I think when you're writing a leaflet like this, it pays to have a little bit of restraint. And there's actually a lot of power when you do show restraint, even though you're clearly and justifiably outraged. The writers, as far as I'm concerned, didn't really do a great job here. But anyway, what I wanted to comment on was the fact that we've just heard that in Quebec, they had this 16-day campaign. And following this 16-day campaign, hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses were imprisoned.
In 1946, our brothers held a 16-day campaign to publicize the state's disregard for freedom of worship. That led to the arrest of hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses in Quebec were imprisoned in the 1940s following a campaign in which a pamphlet was distributed. Well, today we have the situation in Russia where, if I'm not mistaken, the number of Jehovah's Witnesses incarcerated or in pre-trial detention is in the hundreds. So similar numbers, really. But with Russia, they go one step further and say, this is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So Russia is the king of the north. And when an angel was speaking to Daniel on the banks of the river Tigris, he had Russia in mind for what they were doing in persecuting God's people and in unfairly imprisoning God's people. Well, how can you say that about Russia but not say it about Quebec? It seems self-evident to me that throughout the organization's history, there have been instances where there has been persecution. And by the way, you can say that of a great many different religious minorities, not just Jehovah's Witnesses. In some instances, conspicuously Malawi, the persecution spills over into bloodshed and brutality, and I'm trying to keep things mild for YouTube. The persecution in Malawi was so much worse than anything we're seeing in Russia. But because it suits the organization and their doomsday agenda and their desire to stir up Jehovah's Witnesses and get them all frothing at the mouth at the thought of being persecuted, they go to the extreme of saying, well, this particular persecution in this particular country is actually the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. I just think it's worthwhile making that point for any Jehovah's Witnesses who may be watching. And if you are watching, well done. Well done for making it this far through. Worth thinking about, isn't it? How can the organization be so arbitrary in singling out some countries in some periods of history as being fulfilling Bible prophecy in their persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses, and other countries in other periods in Jehovah's Witness history, not so important. Anyway, that was all I had to say about the September 2021 JW Broadcasting episode. Wow, quite an interesting episode. You had Patrick LaFranca, amateur mental health expert, telling Jehovah's Witnesses that they shouldn't be discouraged, that they need to get off the sad train and get on the happy train. And certainly, whatever happens, not let any discouragement stop them from serving Jehovah, from following the organization. Very, very manipulative, that particular part of the program. And we also, of course, had, for me, the standout, Tony Morris, once again begging. Apparently it's just talking about money when Tony Morris or when anyone on behalf of the governing body does this. It's just, we're just talking about money. Jeez, calm down. repeatedly, again and again, twice in fact, over the course of just a few weeks. We're just talking about money. This isn't begging. Yeah, whatever, Tony. I think we can see through it. I think, again, this is an organisation that is palpably desperate, both in financial terms and in their struggles with apostates and the media. They really do seem to be in panic stations, don't they? But that's all I have time for. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.